Good day. My name is Megan Sylvester, and I'm a music sociologist. And I have been doing a series of interviews for the podcast entitled Calypso, the New York Experience. And today we're going to be speaking with Carol Hodge, and he's going to be giving us a sense of his interaction with Calypsonians and soca artists, and from his perspective, being involved in this Calypso fraternity over the years. And so, welcome this morning, Carol, to this podcast. So tell us a little bit about who you are and how you entered this landscape, this space, to be talking about and working with all of these artists.
Yeah, good morning, Megan. Thanks for having me. My name is Carol Hodge. I'm originally from the tiny island of Anguilla, but I have been fortunate enough to be embraced and adapted by the Trinidadian community. So I've been working with Calypso and soca for many, many years. I migrated to the US in 1983, and that's where I started my journey working with, starting out by touring with the Mighty Sparrow and working with many of the other Calypso and soca artists in that era.
All right, so you skipped a lot there. So we want to go back a little bit. Tell us, how did you come from Anguilla and end up touring with Sparrow? We need to get the story behind
it. Okay. It's a long story, but I'll condense it. Okay. Well, like many other Caribbean people, I got my green card, we call it at the time, and had an opportunity to migrate to the US. And in 1983, after living in St. Thomas for about 3 years, I decided I wanted to explore my musical journey a bit more, and I decided that New York would have been the place that I wanted to go to. So I came to New York, and it's like anything else I say, it's a blessing because all the parts fell in place. I knew a friend that lived close to the musicians at the time that worked with the Mighty Sparrow in Harlem. Okay. And they introduced me to the group, and they introduced me to Sparrow's manager at the time, which was a gentleman called Sam. Okay. And after meeting me, we practiced a little bit. They liked my vibe, and they invited me to come back and rehearse with them more and more. And we just had a bond, and that's where the opportunity came for me, because at that time Sparrow needed a drummer for traveling. Okay. So that opportunity fell in my lap, and I was grateful.
Right. So this is where you tell us now that you're a musician, in particular a drummer, and so that is good for the audience to know and be aware of. So could you tell us a little bit about the fact or the details regarding your being involved in music prior to even joining the band, this traveling band with Sparrow? Is it that you were a drummer back in Anguilla and that you came to New York with this special intention to be involved in music, or was it all very accidental?
Well, I always had a passion for music as a kid. And I remember being poor and growing up in my island. I had to make my drums from cans and boxes. So it was a love that I couldn't avoid for music, and especially after having the opportunity to look at some groups, I realized that the drummer was the person that I liked the most. So that piqued my interest, and I started to make my drums from pots and pans, and put the family's radio next to me and practice. So this went on for quite a few years. In the beginning, I was about 13, 14 when this all was happening. And so when I migrated at the age of 17 to St. Thomas, I was already able to play drums basic enough to get myself a gig with a group in the Virgin Islands. And from that opportunity and improving more came the move to New York and the other opportunity with Sparrow.
All right. So tell us a little bit about that experience, because it becomes important to really understand that when we're talking about Calypso, we're not just talking about Trinidadians and Tobagonians. And I'm so glad that you started off speaking about the fact that you're originally from Anguilla, and then you just introduced the whole concept of working and living in St. Thomas, which is the US Virgin Islands, right? So it becomes important for us to understand that Calypso is this Caribbean, right, music,
Yes.
understanding that. So tell us a little bit about this Anguillan drummer who is performing and touring with the Mighty Sparrow from Grenada and then Trinidad and Tobago. Tell us about that.
Yes, well, that was an amazing experience. It also was a challenge for me because having an opportunity to work with the Calypso King of the World was not an easy task. So having the limited experience that I had to put in a lot of time. I had to practice. I had to get my act together. I had to, lots of hours. I spent 12 to 13 hours in a basement just practicing all day and being able to be prepared for working with the Mighty Sparrow. And because of the passion and because of the drive that I have, I was able to accomplish the preparation and was able to work with Sparrow for 6 years. And most of all, having the most amazing experience to tour with him to Nigeria in 1986. That for me was a great experience and opportunity.
So tell us a little bit about taking Calypso to the world, and in this particular example, to Africa. What was that experience like?
It was an amazing experience, and it also opened my eyes to how popular Calypso were back in the day, and how popular Sparrow was. Sparrow was huge in Africa. Most of his songs were well known, and it was amazing. And on that specific tour, it was a team of Caribbean artists. So we had a group from Jamaica, we had a group from Trinidad, and we had, I think Arrow was on that tour as well. So practically they put together the best of the Caribbean to take to Africa in 1983. That show was promoted by Guinness, the drinking company Guinness, yeah. So it was an amazing experience. Africa then and Africa now is a lot different because I went back recently, but nonetheless, Calypso throughout the world is huge. Not forgetting, knowing the history of Calypso, that Calypso was the first million-seller music genre in the world by Harry Belafonte.
Indeed. And that is an important thing for the audience to note and remember. You mentioned Arrow, and I'm aware that you also would have worked with Arrow, as well as other Calypsonians and performers, Arrow being from Montserrat. So we're seeing the Caribbean connection really coming out in this whole discussion about Calypso today. So tell us a little bit about that experience, working with Arrow.
Yeah, working with Arrow was an amazing experience. It was a slightly different experience to Sparrow because Sparrow was so broad, being roots Calypso to, also soca, but Arrow, known at the time as the Soca King, and having a song as huge as Hot 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 was an amazing experience. So I was contacted by Arrow in the mid-90s to do a tour with him, a US tour. He was on Mango Records at the time, and he brought me in as a musical director because I'd gathered a lot of experience, but also from time to time during my experience with Sparrow, Arrow used to be one of the artists that we backed. So we developed that relationship from way back then as well. So I worked with Arrow from the mid-90s until his passing as musical director and drummer, and also produced some songs that we did together for his projects.
So you've explained the difference. One is Calypso, one is Soca. did you notice, even though we've just mentioned this point about Harry Belafonte and, the Calypso being this number one seller, through his expression of Calypso, was there any audience response or audience responses that were different with Calypso as opposed to soca?
Yeah, the only difference I would say that I've experienced was that we had more younger people responding to the soca genre and a broader audience responding to the Calypso genre, which were the Sparrow tours. But along with that, we had more of an international response with Arrow because of his success with Hot Hot Hot. We had an amazing white audience response on tours with Arrow as well.
That's very interesting. So now we're getting into the different types of audiences who really responded or imbibed the music. So tell us a little bit. So you've mentioned Sparrow, you've mentioned Arrow. Who are some of the other persons that you worked with? And if you can tell us about what were those working relationships like?
Yeah, well, I could say that I have worked with every Calypso artist that existed in the 80s through the 90s. And the list is so long. I sat down the other day thinking of who I didn't work with. And there was no one that I could think about. Now, the more recent soca artists, no, I haven't done much work with them. But every Calypsonian who came through the 80s, through the 90s, to the 2000s, Explainer, Gypsy, Beckett from St. Vincent, Winston Soso from St. Vincent, you name them, Crow, Singing Sandra, every Calypso artist I was blessed to have the opportunity to work with. So it was an amazing experience for me.
In terms of touring, world, you've mentioned, a few places. Is there any other places that you would have gotten an opportunity to go to? And then if so, if you can tell us about the experiences. You spoke about the reception by certain groups, but I'm trying to get now to how did Calypso really make its mark on the world? Because when I talk to young people today, a lot of them are not so enthused by Calypso. And I believe it's because they just don't know the history, and it becomes important for them to be aware of the fact that there was a time when there was a golden age of Calypso. But even in addition to that, so we're talking about the 50s, and then we get to the 80s and the 90s and the 2000s, where Calypso was being, had high respect, worldwide. So tell us a little bit more about those experiences. Perhaps if you would have played for different carnivals all over the world, etc. Tell us about that.
Yes, well, I've done Notting Hill Carnival in London. We've done the whole of the Caribbean. My other travels outside of like to places like Japan and these other places were not with the Calypso genre. This were with other groups that I played with, but the reception for Calypso across the world was amazing. And yes, we do have that divide now with the younger generation, which we have to fix the best way that we can. But the reception for Calypso across the world were also amazing, were always amazing. Sold out venues. I remember one of the popular tours that we used to do were Canada, where we would start from, for an example, in the US, we would start from like California, which I think would be Vancouver, and tour all the way to the east. And you're talking about sold out concerts throughout those tours with Sparrow. And sometimes we would meet Byron Lee on that leg. He was also doing the Calypso soca thing. So Calypso were huge in those days back in across the world. Yeah.
All right. And it is not often that audiences get an opportunity to hear someone who is not in the front, all right, of the stage performance. So you are a drummer, you're a musician. Can you give us a little sense of what that experience was in terms of being a musician and having the studio sessions in addition to the live sessions and, working with the background singers, working with the frontline singers and other musicians in the band? What was that band experience like for the Calypso
Yeah,
album?
yeah, that was an amazing experience. So I used to wear a few hats. Back in the day, I would be called for a background vocal session. Myself, Pete Styler, and sometimes George Victory, Janet Allen, she's passed on. A lot of them, I would be called for a background vocal session, let's say on a Swallow album, on an Explainer album by Charlie's Records. So we were dabbling in many aspects of the music. We would do background vocals, then I would get a call back for the same song as a drummer, drum programming or playing on a record. And eventually then we will end up taking these same songs on the road as live musicians and playing them again. So it was an amazing experience being a part of these projects from the ground up, from the first note until the record shops and until the streets, and seeing the amazing response of the people to the music at the time.
Right, and we just learned that you're a background singer. We just learned that. So musician in terms of playing an instrument, and now you have your instrument as your voice. So tell us what the experience was like when you did these background vocals, because again, I think it's so important for people to understand when we're talking about Calypso, that it is not just the Calypsonian who is on center stage that is dominant. There's a whole, industry, there's a whole group of people, there's a whole movement that is behind this individual. So tell us what the background vocal experience was like.
Well, that was an amazing experience because I got to work with a lot of great singers. And hence the reason why I end up being a producer and telling myself, you know what? These singers are so great. You need to shift aside a little bit and let them do their thing. So I'm saying that to say that I have retired from singing and started to do more on the production end, on the producing end, because I've worked with so many awesome singers back in the day. That was an amazing experience because I get to learn the structure of production. How do you put a song together? What are the phases? What are the stacks and the proper way to construct production? There is a right and a wrong way to do these things. So I was fortunate enough to work with producers like Frankie McIntosh, who were producing a lot of the hits in the 80s and 90s, and sit at his side and see how he did it and learn it from the pros. So that gave me a great opportunity to be able to branch off and apply this same method to my work and eventually be able to achieve success with that as well.
Okay, so how does one move from a drummer, a background singer, to a producer? I mean, you've explained to us, that you've retired from singing and that you've worked with other producers, but what made you decide, my contribution is going to be on the producing side? Because I think, a lot of young people, when I do a lot of secondary school lectures and I speak to a lot of young people about Calypso. And interestingly, not all of the students are interested in being a Calypsonian or being a singer. Even though, you have boys and you have Nadia and you have Nyla and you have all of these young people, what as soca stars, and then you have, Ronaldo London, Francis, Desire Connor, you have all of these people being dominant as young people in the art form. Some young people really want to work in the back end.
Yes.
And it would be very interesting for them to be aware of what goes into being a producer of Calypso and soca music.
Yes, well, it starts with having that passion because it requires a lot of time, it requires a lot of study, it requires a lot of work. The first step I would say is to listen to music, listen to production. try to understand the layers, but also try to find someone around you that does it. If you could find a friend or a producer, someone who knows a producer to introduce you, and just sit around them and see what they do and how they do it. I must say it's a lot easier today to become a producer than back in the day. Reason being, you can have a laptop as your production station nowadays with technology. Back in my day, we had to go to a studio to learn. Studios were $500,000. Now I'm recording the same type of production on my laptop.
Right.
So the opportunities are greater for young producers. If you have a passion for it, study it. There's a lot of information on YouTube. Even me at times have to go there to get information. So I would say, let YouTube be your teacher if you don't have any other source. But you must dedicate that time. A lot of producers nowadays, they have a laptop, they build beats, they give them to artists sing on them. That is not necessarily production. Production is a process that is very detailed and very deep. Production is a process where you have to get a singer in a booth and you have to be able to direct them through the process of delivering great vocals to give you a great finished product. So it's important to know what is production and what is beat making. Right. Beat making is not production. And this is where there's a little confusion today with that process, but I'm saying that to say that there's a lot of information out there that we can get to understand the proper process of music production.
I think that's very important, because this aspect of the fraternity or the industry is also critical. In terms of, you spoke earlier about Calypso Then and Now. You spoke about audience reception to the art form. What are your views about the state of Calypso now? Because, a lot of people tend to talk about Calypso is dying and there may not be the space for Calypso in years to come. And my response to that argument has always been, at least in Trinidad and Tobago, there is this junior Calypso competition that takes place every year. Yeah, so you have primary school and secondary school children who are participating in a competition, singing songs. When you talk about the death of something, you can't talk about life at the same time. So life of Calypso comes in these young people being involved in Calypso and competing and then going on to the senior competition. So for me, where I stand, Calypso is alive and well. And I always say, long live Calypso. But I'm wondering, what is your position? What is your perspective in terms of the length of years that you've spent from the 80s coming up in terms of having a different experience, seeing audience interaction? Where do you think Calypso is going?
Well, there is a change in what it used to be. And I believe what you just said is important. The young people, the younger generation, must be involved in Calypso, which there is that movement in Trinidad, which is good to hear. There is a slight decline, and I believe that it is because of the education of the genre and being able to implement Calypso into being, how should I say, accepted by the younger generation. Now, it's a tricky topic because we still have soca that is doing well. And if you look at genres, when generations arrive, movements arrive and shifts arrive. But it's important to us to continue to educate the younger people, our children, our grandchildren, continue to give them the history, continue to introduce them to the music, continue to allow them to hear the songs that were great, that they would understand the history and they would develop that passion for the music. Let's talk about another genre for a minute. I would talk about the Latin genre.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll make an example of that to Calypso and just show you a few things. We have in the Latin genre, we had the main music, which was salsa, which were played by all generations in the Spanish community. Then we had a new genre that came in called reggaeton,
Right.
which attracted more of the younger audience. I'm saying that to say that in all music genres, you will find that offspring that are going to pull away from the generation to generation,
Mm-hmm.
but it's still a part of the big picture of our culture. It's still a part of the big picture of the main genre, which would be salsa for them and which would be calypso for us, where
Right.
we have soca now that is pulling away a little at the younger generation. So it's still all a part of the culture. I believe that a good movement would be to implement more lyrical content into the soca genre that would have a similar appeal to the calypso, what calypso used to be with the stories and the double meanings, etc.
Yes. And what I'm also wanting to touch on, because you started off your story talking about music, being a musician.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of the musicality, you just mentioned, infusing more lyrics. In terms of the musicality that exists today, because if we look on the international stage and we look at Afrobeat, so we look at, let's say, calypso, we look at reggae, we look at soca, we look at dancehall. We can talk about, you spoke about reggaeton, we can talk about rap and hip hop, and we saw that there was this movement, the power of the lyricist. And now we see with the introduction of Afrobeats, there is more musicality coming back. What
Yes.
is your perspective about this landscape in terms of the fact that some people say that Afrobeat is of course, very closely linked to Calypso, and there are those synergies. What is your view on this movement of music today?
Yeah, I'm pleased. I'm pleased to see that music is coming back, and in everything else, there is this cycle, even in fashion. We start out one way, we go through that cycle, and it comes right back eventually. Sometimes it takes, you know, a little longer than others, but the musicality is coming back. Lyrics will return, and they're on their way back. It's up to us as writers and producers to make sure that the content we put out has that substance.
Mm-hmm.
But I must say that the Afrobeat is an amazing experience. I'm excited about that because of a few things. Number one, because of music being originally African. I'm
Right.
going to shift a little bit and get kind of passionate about the African culture,
Right.
because as we know, a lot of things started there, including music. And what I am pleased about is I'm pleased to see that the African artists are now taking back the genre, taking back music in general, are dominating the music scene already, which I believe had always belonged to us and were, taken and twisted and recreated and repackaged and presented as other types of music. But I am pleased to see that the African artist has now reclaimed the music industry in a big way. And that speaks volumes for me. And I believe that is a movement that's not only a musical movement. This movement is also a cultural and spiritual movement.
Mm-hmm. I am in full agreement with that because, we always say within the Calypso space is that, Calypso is mother music.
Yes.
And by that, what we mean, it is a start. It is a start. And
Yes.
from there, all things spring out. So, it's really great to be able to make these links between what was to what
Mm-hmm.
is today.
What is, yes.
As we come to the end of this interview, is there anything that you feel that you wanted to mention that we didn't touch on with regards to Calypso, with regards to soca, with regards to the New York experience and these two art forms?
Well, the New York experience is one that I would hope that we could keep alive. When you look at the days in the 80s through the 90s, the movement of Calypso and Soca in New York, we used to have artists flying from Trinidad to come to New York to record. And it was a place that shaped the sound at the time. It was a place that everyone wanted to be at Charlie's Records, to be in his studio, to be produced by him, to get that sound. I would like to see that revived and brought back into the culture, because there were a lot of Caribbean people in New York and the US in general. And we need to continue playing our role as foundation people in the business to keep the culture alive.
All right. Okay. So thank you so very much, Carol Hodge, for sitting with us today and talking about your experiences as a drummer, as a background singer, and now as a producer of Calypso and Soca music. So thanks again for being part of this particular podcast entitled Calypso, the New York Experience. Thank you.
Thank you, Megan. My pleasure.